And telomeres are structures at the end of the strands of DNA, or chromosomes, sorry. And they're like the glue on a shoelace, like my shoelace has glue on it to keep the threads together. If the glue was to wear off, the threads would unravel. So to keep the chromosomes from unraveling, there's the telomeres to keep them together. When you're born, so the Nobel Prize winner did her work with telomeres. Now, a few years ago, there was a study with telomeres. Now, when you're born, the telomeres are a certain length, and as you get older, they naturally get worn off. They get shorter and shorter, and at the end of life, they unravel, at which point so do you. Now, in this particular study, they looked at the telomere length of mothers with chronically ill children. And these mothers had telomeres that were 10 years shorter than their chronological age. In other words, they'd aged 10 years beyond what their chronology would have predicted. If you look at caregivers of Alzheimer's patients, when you give Alzheimer's caregivers the flu shot, there's supposed to be an antibody response. The reason we give you the flu shot is that we give you a viral particle to which your immune system is to make an antibody, which will then fight the flu. And out of 100 people, if you give them the flu shot, 80 of them should mount a good immune response. Amongst Alzheimer's caregivers, only 20 out of 100 will. So their immunity is suppressed. If you wound Alzheimer's caregivers, on the average, their wounds take several days longer to heal than that of non-caregivers. So that here we're talking about, on the one hand, we're talking about the importance of caregiving and nurturing and so on. And then I'm saying that chronic caregiving actually can suppress the immune system. So how do we resolve that dilemma? Well, the dilemma is resolved by realizing that it's not the caregiving per se that creates the problem. It's how we provide that care. And who are we in the process? And in the process of caregiving, do we also give care to ourselves? So I worked in family practice for 27 years or so, and for 7 years I was also the medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, looking after terminally ill people. So in family practice, I got to see who got sick and who didn't. See, the specialists, when they see a person, they've already been diagnosed, or at least it's well known that they have some significant illness. The specialist never sees healthy people. As a family physician, as a family doctor, you see healthy people, and then you watch them get sick. So I started to get a sense of who got sick and who didn't. And those impressions were much confirmed in palliative care. And I really learned after a while that illness wasn't random. And it wasn't genetic for the most part. And although for most diseases, medical thinking professes itself not aware of the causation, in fact, most illnesses can be traced to certain emotional patterns. So that's the subject of my book, When the Body Says No. So it's when I realized all that I began to put together the material for that book. And my impression was that the people who got sick are people that didn't know how to say no. So when they didn't know how to say no, the body said it for them in the form of illness. The second chapter of the book is about multiple sclerosis. And I mentioned to you this earlier during the day that the gender ratio of multiple sclerosis in Canada in the 1940s used to be equal. Now it's 3 or 4 women to every man. There's a very perceptive young man here who asked me today, I don't see him here anymore, but he asked me this afternoon, maybe he's still here, he asked me this afternoon, did you notice that most people here are females? And I said, yep. He says, why is that? I said, well, because how it is in our society, is that for the most part, women are the caregivers. And the women are the ones that are concerned with caregiving. And it's a cultural thing. And I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying that's how it is. Now, when you consider multiple sclerosis, it can't be genetic, because genes don't change in a population over 70 years. So if 3 or 4 women are now being diagnosed for every male, that can't be a genetic influence. Can't be the diet or the climate, as I said earlier. What is it? Consider that women have always had, in this culture, in a patriarchal culture, they've always had the role of being the stress absorbers of their environment. So they soak up all the stress in the environment, including the stress of their men. Which, by the way, is probably why married men live longer than unmarried men, but married women don't live longer than unmarried women. So they've got that role, but also since the Second World War, women have had to take on an economic role as well. So they got the old stress, but now they have this new stress of also having to make a career and a living. Now, I'm not saying that women should be at home pregnant in the kitchen. What I am saying is that this situation has added a new layer of stress. And all that in the context of less support, because of that loss of connection, clan, tribe, community, neighborhood, extended family. No wonder then that more women are getting diagnosed with this condition now, and which very much has to do with stress and people that can't say no. Well, before I wrote the book, and before really I did the research, I just had these impressions. And this group of people with multiple sclerosis asked me to come and speak to them because they'd heard I was interested in the connection between their illness and stress. And so I went. It was it was a support group. And I said, look, I'm very sorry if what I'm about to say is strange to you, or if it seems to be blaming you for your illness. That's not my intention. And I don't actually have any proof for what I'm talking about. I'm just giving you my impressions. So forgive me if any of you feel insulted. Anyway, and having said all that, I gave my talk. And basically what I said is that when you don't know how to say no, your body will say it for you. And one form of the body saying it is multiple sclerosis. But when the talk was over, they all said, you just described our lives. We don't know how to say no. They all said individually. Out of 25 people there, 20 of them signed up to be interviewed for the book. So the second chapter is about multiple sclerosis. And one woman said, I can't even say the word no. And I said, that's fantastic. Give me $100 right now. And she said, well, I don't have it. I said, it's not a problem. After this meeting is over, we'll just stop by the ATM machine on the way home and you'll get the $100 and give it to me. She said, well, I'm not sure that would work for me. I said, look, I'm just trying to get you to say no to a completely ridiculous demand by a total stranger to whom you owe nothing at all. She says, I can't say the word. Well, her body's saying it for her. I'm going to read you some newspaper clippings, all from the Globe and Mail. The first one is by a woman who's diagnosed with breast cancer, and her name is Donna, and she writes the article herself, and her doctor's name is Harold, and her husband's name is Hai, and Hai's first wife died of breast cancer in Montreal, and now Donna, the second wife, is diagnosed with it. And here's what Donna writes. Harold tells me that the lump is small, most assuredly not in my lymph nodes, unlike that of Hai's first wife, whose cancer had spread everywhere by the time they found it. You're not going to die, he reassures me. But I'm worried about Hai. I won't have the strength to support him, I say. Now what do you notice? She's the one diagnosed with a potentially fatal illness, and her automatic and compulsive thought is, how will I emotionally support my husband through my illness? So this automatic and compulsive regard for the emotional needs of others while ignoring your own is a major risk factor for illness. Now when I say a major risk factor for illness, I'm talking about every chronic illness in the book, whether it's cancer or ALS or multiple sclerosis, or rheumatoid arthritis, or Crohn's disease, or lupus, or scleroderma, or chronic asthma, eczema, psoriasis, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, fibroids in the uterus, whatever you care to name, you're going to find these conditions saliently present, these emotional dynamics saliently present in these people. The other clippings I'll read you are obituaries, all from the Globe and Mail. And obituaries are fascinating. You've heard the expression, the good die young. Well, they do. And there's a reason why they do. And you'll see why from these obituaries. This is a doctor who died in Toronto here. He was at Toronto's 6 kids. Never for a day did he contemplate giving up the work he so loved at Toronto's Sick Children's Hospital. He carried on with his duties throughout his year-long battle with cancer, stopping only a few days before he died. Now, let's say that a friend of yours is diagnosed with cancer. Would you say to her or him, "Here, friend, here's what you do. Go back to work tomorrow. And all the time that you're battling cancer," which incidentally is another interesting phrase, battling cancer, the war against cancer. There's a whole other way of dealing with it, you know. But anyway, all the time that you're battling cancer, getting radiation, chemotherapy, just keep working every day. And only give up when you're too weak before you die. So this rigid and compulsive identification with duty, role, and responsibility, rather than the needs of the self, is again a major risk factor for all kinds of illness. The next one, also from the Globe, a woman who died of age 55 with breast cancer. Her name was Naomi. In her entire life, she never got into a fight with anyone. The worst she could say was "phooey" or something else along those lines. She had no ego. She just blended in with the environment in an unassuming manner. Now, the non-expression of healthy anger, the suppression of healthy anger, is a major risk factor for disease. The expression of unhealthy anger is another major risk factor for disease. So, you know, if you get angry a lot and you rage a lot, your risk of heart disease and stroke increase significantly. But if you repress your anger, your healthy anger, your risk of cancer goes up, your risk of other illnesses goes up, autoimmune disease goes up. And there was a study published in a major journal online, I think 4 or 5 years ago. They looked at 1,700 women over a 10-year period. And over that 10-year period, those women that were unhappily married and didn't express their emotions were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were also unhappily married but did express their emotions. So the issue wasn't happiness or the lack of it. The issue was, did you express what you felt or did you not? When we talked this morning about the importance of helping kids express their feelings and to receive those feelings, on our part, to receive their feelings, we're talking about lifetime health here. Finally, this obituary from a physician who died in Ottawa, also of cancer. His name was Sydney. And it's almost unbelievable to read this one, but it's true. It's right from the Globe and Mail. Sydney and his mother had an incredibly special relationship, a bond that was apparent in all aspects of their lives until her death. As a married man with young children, now what you have to understand here is that these obituaries are all written as they were writing about something good and laudable and admirable. And they don't realize that what they're writing about is the very thing that killed these people. As the married man with young children, Sidney made a point to have dinner with them, and with his parents every day, made a point to have dinner with his parents every day, because he was so close to his mom, as his wife Roslyn and their 4 kids waited for him at home. Sidney would walk in, greeted by yet another dinner to eat and to enjoy. Never wanted to disappoint either woman in his life, Sidney kept eating 2 dinners a day for years until gradual weight gain began to raise suspicions. Now, this man suffered from 2 beliefs. One, that he is responsible for how other people feel. Second, that he must never disappoint anybody. So he couldn't say to either to his wife that, look, Rosalind, my mother and I are close, she needs me a couple of times a week, I'm going to have dinner with her. Nor he could say to his mother, Mom, you know what? Most of the time I'm going to have to eat at home with my kids and my wife. You know, my guess is the mother probably could have handled it. Probably. These are the people who get sick with these patterns. And I used to see them all the time in palliative care. In a book I give the example of this guy who I looked after in his last few weeks of life. He was diagnosed with cancer that spread all over by the time they found it. And within 3 months of his diagnosis, he had to be admitted for terminal care to the palliative care unit. And he was the president of a shark cartilage company. Now, some of you might know that shark cartilage was, I don't know if it still is, but it was marketed as a prevention and a treatment for cancer. And this guy was the president of a shark cartilage company. And so he kept eating the stuff. Now, it smelled awful. The stench just reeked all across the palliative care unit. So I asked him one day, well, what does it taste like? He said, it's awful, I hate it. I said, well, why do you keep eating it? He says, well, I no longer think it'll save my life, he says, but my business partner would be so disappointed if I stopped eating it. So I was able to convince him that 1 or 2 weeks before his death, he did not to be still pleasing his business partner. And it didn't matter if the guy was disappointed. So he stopped eating it at that point. So this belief that you mustn't disappoint people and you have to live up to expectations and other people's needs are more important than yours and you must never be angry. And these are killers. Now, I could give you lots of examples of that, but I really won't. Let me just tell you a personal story, okay? Because you might think I'm blaming people for their illness. Are you blaming people for being ill? Well, no, I'm not. I'm not blaming them. And why am I not blaming them? Because it's not deliberate, you see. It's not conscious even. It's unconscious behavior based on implicit memory. They really can't help it. It's based on early childhood programming. I talked about my workaholism. To give another personal example, about, say 14 years ago now, when I was 54, I was visiting my mother in a nursing home. She was 78 then. And she lived in a nursing home because she had muscular dystrophy, a condition that runs in our family. It's a genetic condition in this case. And her sister had died of it, and she had it. And she could no longer lift her arm or get out of bed or move really. She could barely feed herself. Mentally, she was completely with it. So I'm visiting her that afternoon in a nursing home, and as I walk down the nursing room hall, I have a bit of a limp. Now, I'm limping because that morning I had had surgery on one of my knees. I used to jog on cement, that used to hurt, I used to ignore the pain, tore one of my cartilages. I had to have arthroscopic surgery, which means that they go in with a very small probe and under local anesthetic or spinal anesthetic, and they repair or excise the torn cartilage, after which you walk out of hospital, and a few hours later I'm visiting my mother, and so I have a bit of a limp. But when I get to her room, my limp disappears. And I walk to her bed with a perfectly normal gait. And when I say goodbye and leave the room, I'm still walking perfectly normally until I shut the door behind me and I start limping again. Now, what was I doing? Why was I disguising my limp? To protect my mother from? worrying about me, right? But here's the deal. I'm 54 at the time, my mother's 78. She had survived the Nazi genocide, the communist dictatorship in Hungary, the Hungarian Revolution, emigration to Canada with 2 adolescent boys and a husband, and having a child born here when she was nearly 40 years old, when she barely spoke the language in an alien culture, all that stuff. Do you think she could have handled the fact that her middle-aged son had a bit of a limp the afternoon of surgery? It wasn't conscious. It was an automatic behavior. Because I learned in my first year of life that my mother was so stressed that if I wanted to maintain my relationship with her, I better not add to the stress. And one way to protect my mother, which is to protect the relationship, is to suppress expression of my own pain as best I could. And I'm still carrying that 54 years later. And that's why I'm suppressing my limp automatically when I don't need to, and she doesn't need me to either. So these patterns are ingrained early in childhood. Remember what I said earlier, that early coping mechanisms, temporary states that help you cope, become long-term traits that cause pathology. Now, the child really has 2 basic needs on the emotional level. On the psycho-emotional level, human beings have 2 needs. One is for attachment, and we've been emphasizing that the whole day. But the other is for authenticity. Authenticity is the freedom and the capacity to be ourselves, to know what we need, to know what our gut feelings are, and to be able to assert those needs and act on those gut feelings. That's what it means to be authentic. Now let me ask you this question, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you have had the experience, and if you've had this experience, please put your hand up, that you have a strong gut feeling, and you ignore it, and afterwards you're sorry about it, you regret it, okay? Majority, right? How many of you had the experience of having a strong gut feeling, ignoring it, and being glad about it afterwards? One person perhaps, okay? What is it? Now I'm not going to, but I might, if I talk to you personally, I might find that that wasn't the gut feelings that you had, but a strong emotion. And there's a difference, okay? But that's okay. Do you realize what you all told me when you put your hand up? You told me the stories of your childhood. Because have you ever met a 2-day-old who suppresses their gut feelings? Or a 2-month-old? They know what their gut feelings are, and they express them all the time. That's all they got to go by. You were born like that. I was born like that. If between birth and adulthood you learn to ignore your gut feelings, that's because you had to do that in order to survive. That was an adaptation. Now, how would suppressing a gut feeling become an adaptive modality? It becomes adaptive if the parents can handle your gut feelings, or if you get mixed messages. Then you're in a dilemma. In order to survive, I have to maintain my attachment relationships. But if my parents are stressed or needy, then in order to maintain that attachment relationship, I have to suppress myself. Then you will suppress yourself. And that's your adaptation. And that self-suppression later on shows up in the form of cancer or depression or ALS or some kind of other disease. Again, that early adaptation leads to long-term pathology if it becomes a state. Sorry, if it becomes a trait rather than a temporary state. I mean, it might be perfectly legitimate for you to suppress your authentic response if I had a machine gun in my hand. You might feel very angry with me, legitimately, but that might not be the best time for you to express that anger. for obvious reasons. So that temporary state of suppressing your feeling would be very appropriate. But if you did that chronically, that would actually suppress your immune system. Because people that suppress their anger are suppressing their immune systems. Now that's because, again, from the perspective of science, this isn't controversial. From the perspective of medical practice, it's very controversial. Only because doctors aren't taught this stuff. But the reality is that mind and body can't be separated. So whatever happens emotionally happens physiologically. Obviously, if I were to scare you right now, your physiology would change in a split second. And then if you felt safety, your physiology again would change. We've already talked about that. Well, that's like that 24/7. So whatever's going on emotionally is happening, is being manifested physiologically as well. And it's known now that the centers in the brain that manage or experience emotions, we've been talking about those brain centers all day really, particularly the attachment centers, they're physiologically connected with the hormonal apparatus and the nervous system and the immune system. So that an emotional experience becomes an immunological, neurological, and hormonal experience as well. Obviously, again, I mean, if I were to scare you, you'd have the adrenaline and the cortisol, and your nervous system would be a totally different state, and your cardiac system would be in a totally different state. It's just obvious. But that's like that all the time, whether you're aware of the emotion or not. So, how are they connected? Well, the nervous system actually sends wires from the brain to all the organs in the body and back up to the brain again. So that the nervous system provides an electrical grid by which the brain is talking to the organs in the body, and the organs in the body, like the spleen and the bone marrow and the heart and so on, are speaking to the brain. It turns out actually, and I didn't know this when I wrote the book, but it turns out that the heart itself has a brain. There's a nervous system that surrounds the heart in the pericardium, which is the fibrous sheath that surrounds the heart. And that nervous system in the heart has predictive capacities, especially for negative events, so that when you say you knew it in your heart, you did. And that heart brain is connected to the brain in the head. So the nervous system wires together all these organs. Messages back and forth, number one. Number two, each of these systems puts out chemicals into the circulation, messenger chemicals, which all the others can read and receive. So it turns out that the white cells in your circulation can produce every hormone that the brain can produce. And they have receptors for each other's chemicals. So there's a constant biochemical crosstalk between all these systems. So that's another way of the system being unified. The third way happens through the gut. Now, why are gut feelings so powerfully important? Because the gut is an important sensory organ, that's why. The gut is not just an organ of digestion. We think of the intestines purely as digestive organs, but actually the English language knows much better than that. Because it says, I felt it in my guts, or I didn't have the intestinal fortitude. You know, in other words, the gut is very much an emotional organ. It's also very much a sensory organ. And the gut sends many more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. So when your brain is reading the environment, the unconscious messages about what's going on go to the gut. And the gut magnifies those messages and sends them back up here. And those are your gut feelings. So when you're ignoring your gut feelings, you're actually ignoring your whole brain's take on the situation. What usually happens is that you have gut feeling, but you think your way out of it. You talk your way out of it. In other words, you pay more attention to your intellect than to your gut. Well, the gut is going to be right 100% of the time. The intellect is going to be wrong 100% of the time, whenever there's conflict. Because the gut takes in the whole picture. Now, again, when you put your hand up in response to that question, you're actually telling the story of your childhood. That in our society, kids get cut off from their gut feelings because the parents are stressed or depressed or abusive or demanding or whatever, and in order to maintain that attachment relationship, the child has to suppress their own authentic sense of what's going on in the world. And that's when we get terribly confused. And if people are in touch with their gut feelings, most politicians would never get elected. The American neurologist Oliver Sacks, who writes wonderful books on human neurological abnormalities, in one of his books, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, talks about visiting a bunch of patients called aphasiacs in the hospital. Aphasiacs lose the power of speech or processing language because of a stroke in that part of the brain. And so he's visiting these aphasiacs, and they're watching Ronald Reagan, the American president, on television, and they're laughing their heads off. Some of them look outraged at the president, but most of them are just completely caught up in rollicking laughter. And Sachs says, I didn't get it. Did they not understand Reagan? Or is it that I understood him all too well? And what it actually is, it turns out that aphasiacs can tell much better than anybody else when somebody's being inauthentic. So in studies, aphasiacs can tell when people are lying 80-90% of the time, whereas the average person, it's about 50-50. Why do you think aphasiacs have that power? They don't pay attention to the words. They're paying attention to their gut feelings. That's all they got. Now, there's another large group of human beings that also don't pay attention to words but to gut feelings. And what do we call those people? Babies. So we're all born with that capacity, and then in order to maintain our attachment relationships, we suppress it. And when we do, we get ourselves into all kinds of trouble. Then we start ignoring our own feelings. So it doesn't matter who you look at, whether it's people with rheumatoid arthritis. In the book I tell the story of a young Jewish woman who has her first attack of rheumatoid arthritis, inflammation of the joints, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year that falls in September usually, and it's a big holy day and a holiday, and celebrated with a family meal. So Rachel, as I called her in the book, is at her mother's place. She's in her early 30s at this point, preparing dinner for the family meal. And she's working in a real hurry and very hard because the dinner will start at 5:30 or something, and she has to finish by 5 and leave because her brother's come in with his family, and he doesn't like her, and she perceives he doesn't want her there, so she wants to finish the meal and leave before he arrives. At this point in the interview, I said to her, just a minute, are you telling me that you're preparing a meal that you weren't going to take part of yourself? And she said, yeah. I said, well, why? She said, because the family has to be together for Rosh Hashanah, don't they? What's the message? I'm not part of the family. She never finished the meal because her body said no. Her joints developed such severe inflammation that she had to be rushed to hospital, and she was given, guess what medication? Cortisol, the stress hormone, of course, to suppress the inflammation. Now, Rachel, you see, was a failure from the moment she was born. She was a failure from birth because her mother conceived her in a futile attempt to keep the marriage with the father together. And by the time Rachel was born, the marriage was over. What a disappointment she was. And, of course, the father always favored the brother. So she takes on this coping mechanism of being very nice and always ignoring her own needs and taking care of everybody else because that's her substitute for being loved. That's her coping mechanism. And that suppression of the self And that dynamic then leads to the illness. Because, let me show you something about anger right now, okay? We're going to demonstrate healthy anger for you, okay? So I need a volunteer somewhere in the room, okay? You don't have to do anything, just stay where you are, okay? You're going to volunteer? Great, so I'm going to come into, I know this is not going to work for the television, but that's life. So, the question, what's your name? Renee. Okay, thanks for volunteering. So the question is, are you okay with the distance between you and I right now? So if I lecture from here, is that okay with you? Okay, great. So I'm going to come closer to you now, and I'm going to stand here for a moment and ask you if that's still okay with you. If I lecture from here, is that okay?
That's okay.
You have no problem with that. Okay, now I'm going to come really close and ask you if that's still okay. If I give the lecture here, is that still okay?
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, okay. What would you do about it? Now, by the way, the rules here are, and I'm going to go back to the stage now for the sake of the television. So the rules here are that you can do whatever you want, where you are, but you can't leave where you are, because it's a metaphor for your life. So you're in your chair, this is your life. You can't leave your chair, but you can do whatever else you need to. Okay, so I'm standing right over you. You're not comfortable with that. What would you do about it, Renee? No, it's your life, okay? You could do that. That would be kind of that immobilization response I told you about, the reptilian one. So you can make yourself into a little reptile and try and shrink up into nothing. But of course, all I would do is I would get closer to you. Now what?
Then I would have to kind of encourage you to not be that close to me.
And how would you do that? How would you?
To not be that close to me.
You'd say no, get away, right? As you're saying, get out, you're in my space, what emotion do you think you'd be generating?
Well, I mean, I'd give you the opportunity, but you didn't go. I'd be very
Angry. You'd be angry, exactly. So anger, in other words, anything unhealthy about that anger? No. That's healthy anger. Healthy anger is simply a boundary defense. Healthy anger simply says, like you said, you're in my space, get out. Now, if you didn't generate that healthy anger, I could intrude on your space and really stress you. So the healthy anger is there as a boundary protection. In fact, if you look at emotions in general, the role of emotions is really very simple. There's either attachment emotions that say, come closer, I want more of you, or protection emotions that say, you're in my space, get out. So emotions either invite or they repel. And it's all to maintain your boundaries, so that you can have what's nourishing and healthy come to you, and keep out what's unwelcome and intrusive. Now, so the role of emotions then is to protect or to invite. What is the role of the immune system? Is to protect or to invite. The immune system allows in nutrients, but keeps out bacteria or virus or toxins. The immune system will attack anything that's foreign, including it'll attack malignant cells. Because we all have malignant cells in our bodies every day. And by my age, my prostate gland will have lots of cancer cells in it. And by the time men are 80% of them will have cancer cells in their prostate. But that doesn't mean they have prostate cancer. They just have some malignant cells there, because the immune system is able to keep it in check. And everybody's got malignant cells in their bodies every day, because nature makes mistakes in the process of cell division. But as long as the immune system is healthy and active, it can attack the malignant cells, and because it can tell that they're not the self. But what happens when we suppress our anger, our healthy anger, and we don't protect our boundaries, is that given the unity of these systems, that the emotional system is completely connected with, not even connected with, but part and parcel of the same system as the nervous system and the immune system, when we're suppressing the one, we're suppressing the other. And that's why people that suppress anger, healthy anger, suppress their immune system. Or what happens is, when you know how to protect your boundaries, there's a confusion between yourself and the other. Well, the immune system also gets confused. So you get autoimmune disease, where the immune system actually attacks the body. It's as if the Canadian Army attacked Canada. So the body of cells that are meant to maintain your integrity as an organism actually attack you and make you sick. That's what autoimmune disease is. And this is what happens to people who emotionally suppress themselves. But that emotional suppression is not a choice they ever made. It was simply how they survived their childhoods. It also means that when we have a symptom, when we have an illness, it's not enough to say, how do I get rid of this? How do I wage a battle against this? There's another way to look at it. I'll read you a quote by a teacher I already quoted. He says, your conflicts, all the difficult things, the problematic situations in your life are not chance or haphazard. They're actually yours. They're specifically yours, designed specifically for you by a part of you that loves you more than anything else. The part of you that loves you more than anything else has created roadblocks to lead you to yourself. You're not going in the right direction unless there's something pricking you in the side telling you, look here, this way. The part of you that loves you so much that doesn't want you to lose that chance, it'll go to extreme measures to wake you up. It'll make you suffer greatly if you don't listen. What else can it do? That's its purpose. So, strangely enough, a lot of people have told me, I've heard them say, that the cancer or the disease, whatever it was, is the best thing that ever happened to them. Have some of you heard those statements? Now, what are people talking about? How can cancer be the best thing that ever happened to you? What actually people mean by that is that that cancer experience brought them back to their authentic selves. They had to really learn what was important in life. And that's more valuable than life itself. I don't recommend it. I'm not inviting you to get sick so that you can learn. I am saying, though, that when a symptom comes along, be it a rash or a headache, be it dry mouth, be it constant back pain, be it fatigue, sleeplessness, stomach upset, acid reflux, frequent colds, or whether it's more serious illness, like a flare of rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, yeah, get the medical help you need. I'm not saying to suffer, but also ask yourself, what is my body saying no to that I'm not saying no to? What is the lesson here? What is the message here about how I need to become more authentically myself? Let me tell you the story of my friend Shannon Duke in Calgary. Shannon is now 47, maybe 48 this year. And when she was 37, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, which means to say that by the time it was diagnosed, the cancer had already spread to her bones. So she was at the time high-functioning executive for Microsoft in Calgary, married to a prosperous businessman. They had a perfect home, perfect family, 2 young kids, aged 3 and 1, perfect marriage, and then she's diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 4. In her ribs and in her spine, in her neck. Having had the money, they could go to the best places in the States and Toronto to get the best medical advice, so that she received top-notch medical advice and state-of-the-art medical treatment, and with that she was given 1 year to live. And it was in February of last year, I think, that Shannon went to the Napa Valley of California, where driving around in chauffeur-conducted limousines, they went to the wineries, and they celebrated her 10th year survival and her 47th birthday. And you might say it's a miracle, or you might ask, what actually happened here? What happened here is that Shannon decided she wanted to live for the sake of her children. And she got that the life she had up till then was not her life. The reason it wasn't her life is because she was sexually abused as a child. Remember I said to you that if you're abused, your risk of cancer goes up nearly 50%? When you're abused, there's a number of ways of dealing with it. One way of dealing with it is that you become overwhelmed by pain and then you become addicted to something so that you can soothe the pain. So that you become a food addict or an internet addict or a drug addict. It's all the same. Another way that you can cope with it is the way Shannon did. Since the child can't help but take everything personally, of course her interpretation, unconscious interpretation of why this happened is this she deserved it. So if she deserved this terrible thing happening to her, she must indeed be a terrible person. How you compensate for that? By being extra good. So she became a good girl, perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect employee, perfect wife. And as such, she never talked about the abuse, never talked about the fact that her husband had an addiction issue that really bothered her, but to talk about it would not be perfect. Or that really she wasn't cut out to be an executive of Microsoft. She's very bright and very vigorous, but that's not her. And also, she had a spiritual side that she never explored or honored because she was too busy doing everything else. So she was shut down when it comes to authenticity. And when she decides she wants to live, she says, I want to live authentically. So she says, hell with the perfection. And she confronted her husband about his addiction, her family of origin about the abuse, quit the job, began to explore her spirituality, do this emotional work of healing. So Shannon and I sometimes lead healing seminars together because she manifests, embodies real healing presence because she's worked it through. Now, that's why I'm pretty sure, and she's pretty sure, well, pretty sure is an understatement. She knows that's why she survived. So that even in that case, even in the case where the doctors had pretty much given up on her, it wasn't necessarily over. So I'm saying that the sooner we get this, the more we pay attention to our body's signals, and the more we learn how to say no when there's a no there that we want to say, the more healthy we become and the less likely that we are all ill. I'm not saying everybody could be saved, everybody could be cured, nothing like that. But certainly, it'd be a whole different medical world as if you come in with a flare-up of rheumatoid arthritis, and I could give you the whole lecture on rheumatoid arthritis and the evidence as to why it's related to nervous problems and emotional stress. But if you had a flare-up of rheumatoid arthritis, you didn't just get an anti-inflammatory or a steroid or an immune suppressant. The doctor actually also said, okay, where did you not say no? Where in your work life, where in your personal life did you not say no? How did you generate stress for yourself? Without meaning to, but how did you do it? Not as a way of blaming you, but as a way of saying, if you learn a lesson here, maybe you don't have to have another flare-up half a year from now. And I know that there's somebody in this room who sent me an email saying that they had actually cured themselves from rheumatoid arthritis. And I've had emails from people with multiple sclerosis telling me that, thank you for your book. I have no more flare-ups. Now, again, I'm not holding out a panacea, but I'm saying it's a huge area that's completely ignored in medical practice, or almost completely ignored in medical practice. And when you read the literature in all these runs and walks for cancer and a Terry Fox run, I hate to tell you, it's nonsense. They're never going to find a cure that way because they're working in the wrong places. And Terry Fox himself, for all his courage and admirable dedication, really, is that the example we want to set to people? He's somebody with cancer, and he decides to run across the country with one leg. Does anybody believe that the stress he put on himself was not responsible for his flare-up? Might he not be alive today maybe if he hadn't taken that on? If somebody had told him that? If he wasn't that driven? I don't know, but it's worth asking. And in the New York Times last year, there was a series on cancer, and really the story on cancer is that despite the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been raised and spent on cancer research, we're very little closer to finding the cause or cure of cancer than we ever were. There are some great successes, there's no question about it, in particular in rather rare cancers, but for the most part, we're not getting that far ahead. We're prolonging life a little bit longer, perhaps. That's really all we're doing. And as somebody astute has said, trying to understand cancer by studying the individual cell is like trying to understand a traffic jam by studying the internal combustion engine. Because you're not looking at the large picture. So if you want to look at rising cancer rates among kids, look at kids' lives. If you want to see why the gender ratio between men and women and multiple sclerosis, look at people's lives. And then how can we intervene in our own life or in the life of our culture to reverse these trends? These are really the issues. And for all the advances and for all the great science and for all the genetic insights, we ain't going to get anywhere until we take on this larger picture. The good news is that if we do take it on, there's all kinds of possibilities, as Shannon's and many other people's experience actually shows. And there was the great Canadian stress researcher, Hans Selye, and actually he's from Hungary like me. His father was Hungarian, mother was Austrian. János Selye is his actual name, and he was a medical doctor who came to Canada, and he's the one that did the work on stress in the laboratory. As a matter of fact, he's the one that coined the word stress in the way that we use it these days. And he nearly won the Nobel Prize, but most people have never heard of him because this stuff just gets lost. And he's the one that showed that if you stress animals in a laboratory, they're going to have shrunken immune organs, enlarged adrenal glands, and ulcerated intestines. And Selye is also the one that gave you the thought that I'll leave you with right now. He said that most of the stresses on human beings are emotional ones, and the biggest stress of all is trying to be who you're not. So the maintenance of health really depends on knowing who you are, getting in touch with your body, getting in touch with yourself, being mindful of all that, and honoring who you are. Okay, well, thanks very much. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.